3 soldiers threw her out of a moving aircraft at 9,000 feet above hostile ground. They told themselves she was already dead. They were wrong. But here is the thing that will stay with you long after this story ends. 6 weeks later, those same 3 men were bleeding out in a collapsed building in enemy territory, with no comms, no extraction, no way out, and 0 probability of survival, according to every calculation Command had run. And the only person alive who knew how to reach them, the only person with the skills, the knowledge of that terrain, the specific and unrepeatable combination of training and desperation and sheer refusal to become what had been done to her, was her. The woman they had dropped from the sky. She didn't go back because she had forgiven them. She didn't go back because someone ordered her to. She went back in the dark, alone, with a broken wrist and 2 cracked ribs, because she had made a decision about who she was going to be before any of this happened. And that decision did not have a clause in it for circumstances like these. This is the story of Captain Lena Faris, and when it ends, you will understand something about valor that no training manual has ever successfully put into words. You need to understand what that aircraft was before you can understand what was done to her, because context is everything, and the absence of context is how atrocities get called accidents. It was a classified insertion operation, a small 6-person team being dropped into mountainous terrain that I cannot name because the files are still active at clearance levels above this conversation. 5 men and Lena. Lena was the only woman at that clearance level in her unit. She had spent 4 years earning that position through performance evaluations that her commanding officers struggled to write because the word exceptional felt inadequate, and they did not have better language ready. She was 31. She had 2 deployments behind her, a field medicine certification completed while she was in the field, and a reputation for staying calm in the kind of conditions that send experienced soldiers home different than they left. By every objective, documented, measurable standard available, she was exactly the kind of person you want in a plane above hostile ground. The 3 men who threw her out were not measuring by objective standards. They were measuring by something older and uglier and far more common than any institution will officially admit. Whether they wanted to share danger with someone who looked like her. The team leader was a man named Torres. He was a good soldier. He was also, in the 40 minutes before departure, on comms with command, reassessing the insertion coordinates, because intelligence had come in suggesting the original drop point was being monitored. While Torres was managing that problem, the other 3 men managed a different problem. One they had apparently been discussing in the spaces between briefings and meals and the small, quiet moments that teams accumulate over weeks of preparation. They waited until the aircraft was positioned over the compromised original insertion point. They did not tell Torres. They did not file anything. They had their story synchronized before Lena hit the air. She had been adjusting her primary parachute, that 10-second window between states that every soldier knows, the moment of not quite ready and not quite unready. And in that window, 3 men who had decided she did not belong in their sky made a decision that they believed would solve their problem permanently. She went out of the aircraft. The emergency reserve deployed. It was not a clean deployment. She came down fast and hard and badly into a ravine on the eastern side of a ridge the mission maps had marked as impassable. That word, impassable, was the only thing that saved her. Impassable meant no one was guarding it. She hit the ground and broke 2 ribs and her left wrist. She lay in that ravine for 11 minutes without moving. Not because she was unconscious, because she was doing something she had disciplined herself to do in the worst possible moments. She was assessing, running her body like a diagnostic, asking herself the only question that mattered. What is the actual situation here, stripped of everything I wish was were different. The actual situation was this: broken wrist, 2 ribs, no comms unit, 4 days of food and water if she rationed hard, medical supplies sufficient for field stabilization if she was careful, and a thorough knowledge of every feature of this terrain from 3 weeks of mission preparation that she had done more thoroughly than anyone on the team. She had always known, with the particular and exhausting clarity that women in male-dominated spaces develop like a sixth sense, that she would need to be more prepared than the people around her just to be considered equal. She had resented that truth for years. Lying in that ravine with 2 broken ribs, she was grateful for it in a way that felt almost like grace. She set her wrist using materials from her pack and a technique from a field medicine manual that most of her unit had never opened. She taped her ribs. She catalogued her supplies with the focused efficiency of someone who has fully accepted that the situation is what it is, and that every second spent grieving it is a second stolen from surviving it. And then she began to move. Not toward extraction. Extraction was a fantasy without comms. She moved toward the only achievable thing: higher ground, better visibility, the possibility of a signal. She did not let herself think about the 3 men who had put her here. She thought about it once on the first night for approximately 60 seconds. The full weight of it, the deliberateness of it, the fact that they had looked at her and made a calculation and acted on it. She let herself feel all of it. And then she filed it somewhere she could not afford to access. And she did not open that file again. Because those men were not in this ravine. She was in this ravine. And the cause of her situation and the solution to her situation were not the same people. They would never be the same people. She could not afford to wait for the people who had broken her to be the people who fixed her. She would fix herself with whatever was still working. On day 2, there was a rock face. One-handed, wind coming sideways off the ridge, ribs compressing with every reach. She climbed it. She did not rush. She did not panic. She moved the way she had learned to move through every obstacle in her career. One hold at a time. Full presence in the current position. No energy spent on the position she hadn't reached yet. It took her 4 hours to cover ground that a healthy soldier would have covered in 45 minutes. She did not waste a single one of those 4 hours regretting the difference. On day 3, she found a route through the lowest section of the ridge that the mission maps had missed entirely, which told her something about who had done the terrain analysis for those maps, and she filed that observation somewhere she would be able to access later when it would be useful. On day 4, she walked into a remote monitoring outpost that had been marked on mission maps as potentially staffed by local allies. It was staffed. She identified herself through the protocol she had memorized during prep. She did not break down. The people at that outpost later described to debriefers a woman who had clearly been through something significant and had made a very specific, deliberate choice not to be defined by it. Before she accepted water, before she accepted any treatment for her wrist or her ribs, she asked for the status of her team. The answer was classified. But the shape of the answer, the pause before it, the careful language around it, the things that were conspicuously not said, told her enough. Torres and 2 others had been extracted under fire. The 3 men who had put her out of the aircraft were listed as missing in action. Last known position, a collapsed structure in a valley 14 kilometers from the original insertion point. Extraction had been attempted and deemed untenable due to enemy activity in the surrounding area. Command had made the calculation that such situations sometimes require, the calculation that everyone in uniform knows exists and no one discusses at dinner. And the 3 men were in the process of being reclassified. She asked for a map. She asked for the last known coordinates. She asked for whatever equipment the outpost could provide. The outpost commander looked at her wrist. He looked at the way she held her ribs when she thought no one was watching. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You know who those men are. You know what happened on that aircraft." She said, "Yes." He said, "And you're going back for them." She didn't answer that as a question because it wasn't one. She said, "3 soldiers are alive in a window that is closing. What they did to me will be dealt with separately. Right now, I need what I need to go get them." He gave her what she needed. 14 kilometers, active hostile terrain, a broken wrist, 2 cracked ribs, equipment assembled from a remote outpost inventory instead of a properly resourced loadout. She moved at night. She assessed the structure using her knowledge of the region's construction materials and the physics of collapse, knowledge she had acquired, again, beyond the requirements of her role, because knowing more than required had always been her insurance policy against a world that was looking for reasons to say she didn't belong. She identified the survival pocket, the space inside the collapse where 3 people could still be breathing if the structural failure had gone the way her assessment suggested. She went in. The darkness inside a collapsed building is different from other kinds of darkness. It is active. It has weight. There are sounds that might be settling and might be something else, and you cannot afford to decide which one until you have more information. She moved through it methodically. She found the first man. She found the second. She found the third, the one who had coordinated what was done to her, deepest in the structure. He was conscious. In the dark of that collapsed space, he looked at her face, and she watched the full understanding move across his expression. Who had come? Who had not come? What it meant that she was here. She said nothing. She got him out. She got all 3 of them out. At the debrief, after the inquiry had run its full course, after the testimonies, the aircraft data, the outpost commander's account, the reckoning that was official and documented and real and insufficient. The officer conducting Lena's final debrief asked her the question that everyone in that building had been carrying since the rescue reached them. She asked it plainly. Why? Lena was quiet for 23 seconds. The transcript records it as 23 seconds. And then she said, "I decided what kind of soldier I was going to be a long time ago. That decision didn't have a clause in it that said, except when they don't deserve it. It was a decision about me, not them. It was never about them." 23 seconds of silence, and then that. And the officer conducting the debrief, a woman who had spent 20 years in rooms that were not built for her, who had made her own version of that same decision in her own version of that ravine, wrote nothing in the transcript for a long moment. Because there was nothing to add. Because that sentence was already complete. It was already everything. This is what valor looks like from the inside. Not from the photograph, not from the ceremony, from the inside, from the ravine, from the rock face, from the collapsed building in the dark, from the 23 seconds of silence before you find the language for the thing you have always known, but have never been asked to say out loud. It is not reciprocal. It is not a transaction. It is a decision you make once, clearly, about who you are going to be, and then you are required to honor it in every unclear moment that follows. Including the moment you are standing at the entrance of a collapsed building with a broken wrist, deciding whether to go in for the people who dropped you from the sky. Captain Lena Faris still serves. She is not done. The woman who survived the fall and the ravine and the rock face and the 3 days of impassable terrain and the 31 hours of the impossible rescue. She reported for duty the morning after her promotion ceremony, exactly as she had reported every morning before it. Because the decision she had made about who she was going to be did not change with rank or recognition or the resolution of the inquiry. It was made before any of this. It will hold after all of this. That is what a real decision looks like. That is what Code of Valor is. Some people will finish this story and feel something shift in them. A quiet repositioning of something they thought was settled. If that happened to you, if Lena's story reached somewhere real, somewhere past the reading and into something that belongs to you, then you already understand what this is. No algorithm brought you here by accident. You needed to hear about the decision that doesn't have a clause in it. You needed to be reminded that valor is not about the people who deserve it. It is about who you decided to be. That's yours. No one can take it. Not even from 9,000 feet.